again, just to kind of explain my role at TechTarget very briefly, essentially as the director of client consulting, I have the ability, or I have the fortunate ability to look after and engage with a lot of folks in this room, as well as also a lot of our clients across Southeast Asia as well. And one of those things, and in part with that, it allows me to understand some of the use cases that a lot of folks like yourself, as well as also our folks and our counterparts in Singapore, kind of go through. And one of the things that I notice, and one of the things that kind of through working with a lot of you, I understand is that events is a major use case down here. You can see here, even from our own media consumption reporting, when it comes to the technology evaluation phase for purchases, a lot of times and a lot of your prospects are at events, which begs the question of how do we reach not just the same prospects that come for the fidget spinners, for the frisbees, or to try and win that Google Home. It's how do we look after and how do we find those prospects who are in market right now to hear not just about your solutions, but also take a meeting with your sales, and we'll talk a little bit about that from a data perspective. And as John mentioned, we'll have Vicki join us to give her perspective as well too. But again, kind of digging in a little bit further, and through doing a bit of research for for this presentation, I found an organization called Certain, and Certain does events marketing automation. And one of the things that they focus on is they run a study to understand from a marketer's perspective what are the main sort of objectives and what are the main challenges that marketers face when it comes to executing against events. And the objectives really boil into three specific cases, driving demand, accelerating pipeline, and generating revenue. Of course, that creates or presents its own set of unique challenges, which of course are maximizing that pipeline, ensuring that the number of event attendees actually show up. Again, kind of with the accident on the bridge, I know that, there's Chris. Chris was a little bit nervous to, we'd have about half the room actually show up, so good to see that, we have a full room here. But then, of course, lastly, post that, the number of sales qualified leads, right? The number of people who aren't just coming to drop their business card, again, as I mentioned, to win something, but, again, to take that natural next step and have an engagement with sales. And when we think about executing against an event, of course, I want to look inward. I want to talk a little bit about, our summit, right? And with the way that we set up our summit and with the way that we wanted to execute against it and get, of course, all of you in the room, we first started by looking, who have we had conversations with in the past? Who are current customers? Who would be most receptive to hear about some of the, tactics or, some of the sessions that we had. And, again, it started first by pushing out relevant content. And, I'm sure that all of you in the room were on the receiving end of emails such as these. Again, talking about and sending messages that directly align with maybe your roles or what you're currently tasked with at your organization. Of course, the other reason against that is, we also created an agenda that we knew would spark some interest and prompt you all to come here. And again, maybe it was because you wanted to understand, how can you better work with your sales counterparts? How can you provide data to help arm sales in the field? Maybe again, you wanted to learn from Belinda against how you can better improve your ABM strategy or, get started. Or maybe you just wanted to hear from Greg Wood and Susie at SAS about what does that customer journey look like? What are the data points that we as marketers need to pay attention to in addition to, what we're already, possibly looking at from, your own perspective. So in doing that, of course, and bringing it back to inviting people to your events, we focus on, the different data sources, and Colin laid this out beautifully. Our first party, our second party, our third party. Of course, when it becomes, or when you start to invite folks to your events, you focus on your own internal database, right? Who do we know? Who can we send these emails out to? And who can we get to show up? But we also know, again, from a second party perspective, where there's organizations like TechTarget who are creating, cultivating, and maintaining that database of active prospects, you look at roughly 85% of that actual market of contacts that you could be possibly reaching out to. So again, while yes, there is that perception of a walled garden, these are where your users are in that specific area. So that brings me to the first learning. Behavior is indicative of pre-purchase research. Again, I also go by the motto or the mantra of activity is also the greatest precursor to a project. So with that, we look at this idea of finding the right pool of people, and that right pool of people goes to this idea of the total addressable market. And when we define that total addressable market, it's who are those users underneath, in this example, cloud security or New South Wales or FSI, government and healthcare. Who are those users that are doing that research, again, outside of all of the other topics and all of those other spheres of research, and how do we bring them all together as events for event marketing? And it's merging that information together to create one single source of truth. I know I'm borrowing that from the data presentation before, but it's that general idea of how do we bring all three of these separate total addressable markets into one? Our second learning, again, and it goes back to the idea of creating content that's relevant to these users. It's about sending content that speaks directly to these users. Again, bringing this example of an FSI researcher, for example, with an event where you're looking forward or looking towards attracting FSI users, sending out content that directly relates to those FSI users, highlighting that, hey, we have Pepper Finance that's going to be giving a keynote. That directly speaks to those users, that directly speaks to, again, what they can learn specifically to that. And again, when we look at event recruitment, again, I think that we focus a little bit just on the pre-event. How many people can we get into the room? Can we fill the room? But also, again, during the event is just as important too. You're going to have prospects coming up to your sales reps. What do your sales reps know about them above and beyond a first name, last name? Do they know anything about what their interests lie? Again, it's about arming sales or arming whoever's at the booth to have an intelligent first phone conversation, first face-to-face conversation as well too. And then of course, lastly, again, a marketer's job isn't done just because the event's over. It's really where the next steps occur. It's about taking that information from users' contact details, figuring out who else at that account also has that propensity to speak to you about your solutions. Taking that information, passing it over to sales for follow-up, and giving them that level of information. We'll hear from Tom in the next session just around, again, the type of data points that sales requires to have those intelligent first conversations. So again, I want to focus a little bit on the pre-event. And again, to borrow John's phrase, stop me if you've heard about Priority Engine, but again, I think it's important to, when you have the data, to showcase how you can use it from an execution standpoint. So think about it from a pre-event standpoint. We talked about those three different total addressable markets. Our cloud security users in New South Wales with focus in government, healthcare, and finance. So with that, again, it's the merging of those three different total addressable markets to create a list of companies and a list of contacts that have that propensity to come and visit your booth, have that propensity to come and visit your event. So really, in summation, and bringing it back to our two key critical takeaways, first of which, behavior is indicative to show for pre-purchase research. Again, finding that right pool of people to invite to an event, whether it's offline or online. And then, of course, lastly, using those insights, those pre-purchase insights, to push out relevant content and relevant messaging to these users to, again, attract them and bring them to your event or even bring them to your booth. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite Vicki Quinlan up to stage, and what we will do is we'll have a little bit of a deeper conversation around how she's focused and, again, weighs against attracting the right people to her events. In terms of just the number of events to kind of level set, how many events would you say you've run just across this year?
I think by the time we get to the end of this year, we would have run somewhere between 40 and 45 events for the whole year. So we probably average about 10 to 12 a quarter.
So just in terms of that, and can you guys all hear me? I have the microphone off, so I can talk through this. So with that, and kind of with respect to the number of events that you've run, have you seen that change? Again, I know we've talked a lot about digital marketing, but think back to maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Has that number of events that you've run, does that change, or maybe does it remain static?
This region does a lot more events than other regions, I've discovered. I'd say probably fairly static from our point of view. I think we've done a lot of events as Boomi because we're quite new to the market. So Boomi's only really been going in the APJ region for the last 3 or so years and only had a marketing team for the last 2 years. So I think that's probably why we've done so many events.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the pre-purchase aspect, or the pre-event aspect of running events. And obviously, when you go and execute across an event, you're given, here's your budget for, souvenirs or whatever it may be. How much of that budget actually typically goes towards attracting or pulling in lists of people that you could possibly invite?
I guess it depends on the type of event. For webinars, when we do those, I'd say a good plus 50% of the budget would go on the acquisition of attendees to those events. Small kind of round table type events, again, it would be a fairly high percentage of the overall budget would go on acquiring people to those. But when it comes to the larger trade show events that we sponsor as an exhibitor or a presenter at those events, it would be much, much less.
So let's talk about actual attendees. So I mentioned before, obviously you balance the who's just coming for the gift, who's coming for, to win the raffle. Do you have any metrics, whether it's, through working with your team or even just personal metrics to ensure that, you're getting net new and maybe just not the same people showing up to every single event?
We've started to do some analysis around that sort of post-event. I think because we've only really been in the market in APJ for the last 3 or so years, we've been a lot about brand awareness and a lot about funnel filling and getting as many contacts in the database as we can. It's only now that we're starting to move in that direction and doing the analysis. So on a few events that we've done over the last few months, gone back and said, there are these people that kind of keep showing up.
The serial.
Yeah, exactly. So if they want a notebook, then knock yourself out. I'm happy for you to have one, but obviously we've got to start now moving forward and becoming more strategic with the events that we're doing.
So is there any sort of strategy that you employ to at least, again, get the quote unquote right people?
For us, as a small marketing team within Boomi, there's only 3 of us and 2 of us that kind of do most of the events. We can't do everything ourselves, so it's about finding the right partners and the right companies to work with that understand our business and what we do and the kind of people that we need to attract. Tech Target's been a fairly big part of that with Priority Engine. We've used that for some of the smaller events that we've done, and the kind of running round table lunches, that sort of thing. So that's kind of...
Yeah. So in terms of that, and we'll talk a little bit about the actual event, but the last question on pre-event, just with respect to the messaging that you pushed out, I sent some of this, put some of the email examples that we used. Are you also doing a similar tactic again, figuring out who the person is that you're emailing first and then kind of seeding in what their interest could be, making some inferences maybe based on, again, Tech Target data or some of the data that you have on them?
Yeah, we are for the smaller events, definitely. The more kind of niche events. We've been running a sort of a series of events around superannuation recently, and we've done a lot of... It's probably been the first time that we've really dug deep into the sort of personas, I suppose, of people that might be attending those events.
So let's talk actual day of, right? And obviously events are incredibly stressful. You run 46 of them. I don't know how you do it. I know. So in terms of, post-execution, middle of the event, when you have, whether it's a sales rep or maybe it's yourself who's manning the booth, are you, do you have any sort of intelligence behind who those users are? Is there anything that you have from hey, here are 2 or 3 key points about, not necessarily, again, David Lane who walks up to your booth, but maybe, here's the general personas of the people that, you could be talking to.
Yeah, we do. One thing I would say that we're very good at is briefing the sales team around all of the events that we do, so that they never just turn up to an event and they don't know what to expect. They might say that, but they have been briefed previously. So regards to kind of smaller events that we do, I guess round table lunches, breakfasts, because it's a smaller group of people, so there's always more intelligence around those people and personas. So our sales reps always have a full brief of the agenda as much as we can. They'll be briefed on the participants that are there, the content that's going to be discussed, even if it's just down to job titles of people that are going to be there and organisations. It might be as simple as that, but we do make sure that they are fairly well armed for the events.
And I think we have time for one more question, and we'll just switch quickly over to post-event, just in terms of post-event and wrap-up analysis, once you do get those full list of users, what are you doing? Are they going over to sales? Are you taking them directly and they're being ingested into marketing automation?
Yeah, so a bit of both really. So they come over direct to us, but and I guess we weren't being as strategic previously as we're starting to have to be now. Those lists now are coming over, and we're having a post-event meeting with all of the reps that attended and everyone that attended that event, and it's fairly basic, but we are working through that list with them so that we can kind of gather up any intelligence and information that we've all got as a collective group on all of those attendees. And that seems we're starting to involve the BDR, the inside sales team, in that process, marketing and the account executives as well.
Perfect. So it sounds like it's a real full team effort post-event.
It is, yes. It's starting to become a full team effort now.
Excellent. So, like I said, I think I'm getting the cue to wrap up. So, with that, join me in thanking Vicki for coming up here and explaining her